together later as the story Cabaret.
Yeah.
You know the
Yeah, I
film?
But
read
that's
about,
a
yeah,
good movie,
Yeah,
Cabaret.
yeah.
That's really a good movie.
Uh, so that sort of gives you an idea of what things were like here at the peak of the good times here. And then came 1929, the crash
Right.
on Wall Street in America, which put America into a depression, dragged the rest of the world down along with it, and hit Germany particularly hard again with those old bugaboos of high unemployment and another runaway inflation. And then add into that political instability. There was a democracy here, the Weimar Republic, but it was a very weak democracy, and a democracy which seemed incapable of dealing with Germany's problems. People were losing faith in the democratic process and beginning to look to the two opposite ends of the political spectrum for some answers. To the left, to the communists, to the right, to the fascists, to the Nazis. If you would have lived in any of Germany's big cities in those late 20s, early 30 years, these two groups were actually fighting in the streets of German cities almost on a daily basis. So you had high unemployment, you had a runaway inflation, and you had political chaos. And then came the elections of 1932. Hitler was, of course, the candidate for the Nazi Party. He might not have had answers to Germany's problems, but he knew who to blame them on, the communists
Yeah.
and the Jews. And enough people were either scared enough or stupid enough that they bought that line of reasoning that in that election, the Nazi Party got the most votes of any party. Germany has a parliamentary system with a presidency and a chancellery. Um, the president at that time was a retired general, Hindenburg, who knew that based on those election returns, he was going to have to name Hitler chancellor. He didn't like him, he didn't trust him, and there were actually a group of men around Hindenburg who felt the same way. But they were convinced in their arrogance that they could control him. So one way of controlling him was they forced him into a coalition government. In his first cabinet, he only had two Nazis. He had Göring and a man named Frick. But as soon as Adolf Hitler was named chancellor of this country, he set about turning Germany into a one-party dictatorship.
Yeah.
And the first thing he wanted was a clear mandate. So he called for new elections in March of 33, and then he set about rigging the elections. Had a lot of communist leaders arrested and thrown in jail.
Yeah.
They didn't quite know what they could get away with at that point, but he allowed Goebbels to slowly begin denying the use of the media to any other party other than the Nazi Party. Now the elections are coming up. It's the end of February, 27th of February. Something happens that I used to say was either great luck or great planning. I'm now convinced it was great planning. There's a fire in the Reichstag building. So the Reichstag building is gutted by fire. Hitler screams that this is a Bolshevik communist plot to take over the country, which is, of course, exactly what he was up to. He goes to old man Hindenburg, who was in his 80s and rapidly heading into senility, and he asks for emergency powers to deal with this crisis. It was actually a crisis which Goebbels and Göring had cooked up. Hindenburg grants him those emergency powers, and he uses those to really fix the upcoming elections. And again, they did some clever things. They let some of those communist leaders out of jail and let them run in the election. And in effect, what that did was it split the vote on the left end of the political spectrum between the communists and the social democrats. So it weakened that end of the political spectrum. They totally clamped down on the use of the media by any other party other than the Nazi Party. So here are the results of that election. Nationwide, the Nazis got 44% of the vote. By the way, they never got a majority in this country.
They never did.
Never did. In that election, they got 44% of the vote. Up here in the north, in the big cities, Hamburg, Hanover, Frankfurt, Berlin, they never got more than 35%. I think here in Berlin it was 32%. But Hitler needed no more than that, because as soon as a new Reichstag was convened, he got together with some other small right-wing parties, and they rammed through what became known as the Enabling Act. In effect, it gave Hitler dictatorial powers. And then in the summer of 1934, old man Hindenburg died. Hitler took the chancellery and the presidency, rolled them into one, declared himself Führer, leader, and then he got the military to swear a new oath of allegiance, no longer to the country Germany, but personally to him, Adolf Hitler. And from that point on, Germany had totally fallen off the democratic cliff.
Went downhill.
I tell this story, I guess, 2 times a week in the summertime, and every time I tell it, what strikes me over and over again is how fragile and delicate a democracy is, and how easily it can be subverted. Something I worried about for my own country for the last 8 years. Let's go back up to
Question.
Post-war history, because that's also very interesting. I told you that this was the East German government headquarters until 1956. So in 1953, Joseph Stalin died, and most East Germans thought things were going to get better for them, and in fact, they got worse. So there were a group of construction workers here in East Berlin working on, I don't know, an apartment building or something, and they were told that their workday was going to be lengthened and their salaries decreased. So about 80 of them got annoyed enough at this piece of information that they decided to do something that in communist East Germany was a gutsy thing to do. They decided to come over here to the government building and protest. Actually, all they really wanted was to get their working conditions back the way they were. So on the 16th of June, 1953, they first went over to Alexanderplatz, where the big TV tower